Helen stood still in the quiet of her small kitchen in Bath. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, but she did not move to take it off. Her fingers trembled around the letter she had just received. It was not an invitation. It was a wedding announcement, her son's wedding. And her name was not mentioned anywhere. The paper shook in her hand. Her heart ached in that silent, private way only a mother could know. Marcus. Her only son. The boy she had raised with every ounce of strength and love she had left after her husband died. She remembered the nights she had stayed up sewing his school uniforms, the years she had skipped meals to make sure he had enough. Now, the boy she had carried in her arms for 9 months and in her heart for over 30 years was getting married in London. And she had to find out from a neighbor's granddaughter who had seen the social media post. She put the letter down slowly and walked to the living room. The old clock on the mantel ticked with no mercy. She sat on the sofa, staring into the quiet, and memories floated back, birthdays, scraped knees, report cards, graduation day. Her chest tightened. It was as if the past had folded itself neatly into the envelope of that announcement. She could still picture Marcus as a child, hugging her legs tightly, telling her she was his best friend. But that little boy had grown into a man with sleek suits, polished shoes, and a fiancé who, by all signs, wanted him to forget where he came from. Helen wasn't foolish. She had seen the shift. The phone calls grew shorter, then less frequent. Then silence. When she tried to visit, the flat in London always seemed too busy, too full, too inconvenient. But now, seeing it in print, so official, so public, this was a new kind of wound. One that didn't bleed but stung in every breath. She got up slowly and went to her wardrobe. There, tucked in a box on the top shelf, was something she hadn't touched in years. A small, dark blue envelope, sealed with wax. It had been waiting for a moment like this. She looked at it, her hands steady now. If they wanted her forgotten, then she would become unforgettable. The attic smelled of old dust and lavender sachets long forgotten. Helen climbed the narrow steps carefully, the soft creak of each wooden stair beneath her feet echoing like memories. Her fingers brushed the wall as she ascended, the walls lined with faded photographs of birthdays, holidays, and Marcus's first day of school. She pushed open the attic door, revealing the dim space lit only by a narrow beam of sunlight cutting through the small round window. Boxes were stacked neatly in corners. Helen was always organized. She knew exactly where to look. Beneath an old quilt her mother had sewn decades ago was a long, flat box wrapped in brown paper. She pulled it out, her heart beating steadily now. She undid the string with care and peeled back the paper. There it was. A dress the color of stormy skies, deep, elegant gray with soft silver embroidery down the sleeves. It had belonged to her own mother, worn only once, to a grand dinner long before the war. Helen had preserved it, altered it slightly over the years, but never had a reason to wear it. Until now. She held it up and smiled faintly. It still carried the scent of lavender and mothballs, but it shimmered quietly in the light. She could already see herself in it, standing tall, proud, uninvited. She descended the stairs slowly, cradling the dress as though it were glass. Back in her bedroom, she laid it across the bed and sat beside it. Her mind wandered to Marcus's fiancée, Eliza, a young woman with the kind of poise Helen had never quite trusted. Helen had only met her once, 2 years ago, during a rushed lunch at a cafe where Eliza had barely looked her in the eye. That meeting had stayed with her. So had the sense that Marcus was slipping through her fingers. She had let him go once. She would not do so again. Later that evening, Helen sat at her desk and picked up a pen. She began to write a letter, not to Marcus, nor to Eliza, but to the wedding coordinator. She had the address from the envelope. She worded her message carefully, gracefully. The tone was polite, the signature simply, H. Weatherby. She did not ask for an invitation. She requested a seat. The morning of the wedding arrived cloaked in thick London fog. Helen stepped off the train at Paddington Station wearing a long navy coat, a neat hat pinned firmly to her grey curls, and a suitcase no larger than a bread box. She walked without hurry, as though she belonged in this city of motion and noise. Her dress was carefully folded inside the case, wrapped in tissue and lined with lavender from her own garden. She had pressed it the night before with a warm iron and gentle hands, smoothing every crease like smoothing out years of sorrow. She checked in at a modest guest house just outside Kensington, close enough to the wedding venue but far from the noise of tourists. The landlady, a woman in her 60s with a warm Lancashire accent, helped her carry the case upstairs. Helen thanked her politely, declining breakfast. She had things to prepare. In the quiet of her small rented room, she slipped into the dress slowly, like slipping into another time. The fabric hugged her frame with unexpected grace. She pinned a brooch to the collar, Peter's old OIF insignia, worn down but polished, a piece of the husband who had once called her his lion heart. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she did not see an old woman. She saw someone dignified, someone who had endured. Her cheeks had lost their roundness, her hands bore veins like rivers, but her eyes, they still held fire. The venue was a historic manor house in Hampstead, wrapped in ivy and guarded by iron gates. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, their laughter rising above the soft sound of string music from the garden. Helen stood at the far side of the lawn, just beyond the rose hedge, unnoticed. She waited. At precisely 1:30, a young man with a headset approached her. His name tag read, Charlie. He checked her name against the list without raising an eyebrow. Ah. Yes, Miss Weatherby. We've reserved a seat in the rear marquee, just beside the fountain. Helen thanked him with a nod and followed his lead. Her heels sank slightly into the grass as she walked. No one recognized her. No one even looked twice. The marquee was stunning. White linen fluttered like sails in the soft breeze. Rows of chairs faced an arch of white roses and silk ribbons. She sat down quietly in the last row. From her place, she could see it all. The altar. The guests. The man she had raised, now standing in a tailored grey suit, glancing nervously towards the manor house. Marcus. He hadn't changed much. A little leaner, perhaps. A little more polished. But when he ran his fingers through his hair out of habit, her heart squeezed. He still did that when he was nervous, just like when he was 5. Helen folded her hands in her lap. No one spoke to her. No one asked who she was. She didn't mind. She was not here to make a scene. She was here to witness. The ceremony began under a sky that threatened rain. Guests hushed as Eliza stepped onto the lawn, her white dress flowing like water around her feet. Her hair was pinned with pearls, her smile delicate and rehearsed. The string quartet played a soft rendition of Clair de Lune as she walked, arm in arm with her father, towards Marcus. Helen watched it all with unreadable eyes. Every detail had been chosen with precision, the flowers, the chairs, the music. And yet, not one thing in this carefully crafted world belonged to her. She had no place in the photos being taken. No seat at the rehearsal dinner. No mention in the order of service. When the vows began, she leaned forward slightly, her gloved fingers curling in her lap. Marcus's voice cracked only once, when he said Eliza's full name. Helen caught it, the tiny tremble, but no one else seemed to notice. Eliza spoke her part with grace and poise. The crowd smiled. A few sniffles. Then applause. Helen did not clap. As the newlyweds kissed and turned to walk back down the aisle, Eliza's eyes swept the crowd. For the briefest moment, they landed on Helen. Their gazes met. Eliza looked away. It was not a look of surprise. Nor was it confusion. It was recognition. The kind you try to pretend isn't there. Helen did not smile. She sat still as petals floated past her feet, as guests rose to celebrate a union she had never been part of. Her heart beat steadily, calmly. She was not angry. She was not even sad. She was waiting. A few hours later, the reception took place inside the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers lit the room with a soft golden glow, and waiters passed champagne on silver trays. Helen entered quietly, her name already on the list, her presence expected, at least by someone. She found her table near the edge of the room. Her place card read, Miss H. Weatherby. Alone. No one came to sit beside her. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She waited. Near the end of the speeches, the best man, a college friend of Marcus's, told a joke about mothers-in-law. It earned a polite laugh. Then Marcus stood. He thanked the guests. He praised Eliza. He spoke of building a future, of honor and family. But his voice faltered when he said the word mother. Helen watched him closely. He avoided looking toward the back of the room. She could see it in the way his eyes wandered, searching for places to land that were not her. It had always been like this, even as a child. When Marcus felt shame, he would run, not with his feet, but with his gaze. Always away. Helen folded her napkin and placed it on her lap. She had heard what she came to hear. And what she hadn't. Now, it was time. The room had begun to swell with the sounds of music and glasses clinking. Couples rose to the dance floor, silk dresses sweeping past Helen's table as if she were not there at all. But Helen remained seated, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She waited until the second song had started, something modern and forgettable, before she rose and made her way to the gift table near the entrance. It was draped in white linen and decorated with lilies and silver candles. Neatly stacked were boxes tied with ribbons, cards tucked in envelopes, and a leather-bound guest book left open to a blank page. Helen flipped through it for a moment, glancing at the names: friends from London, relative from Eliza's side, former university colleagues of Marcus. Not a single name she recognized. From her handbag, she pulled a sealed envelope. It was the same dark blue as the one in her attic, though this one bore a fresh seal of wax pressed with her family's crest. She placed it gently among the gifts, just beside a large silver-wrapped parcel. Then, without fuss, she turned and walked toward the coatroom. She slipped her coat on slowly, adjusted her hat, and took one final look at the celebration behind her. Eliza was dancing now, her laughter light and effortless. Marcus stood beside the drinks table, speaking to someone Helen did not know. His smile looked wide, but his eyes kept drifting toward the gift table, like he sensed something out of place. Helen didn't wait to find out. She stepped outside into the cool dusk. The air smelled of lavender and damp leaves. The taxi she had arranged was already waiting at the gate, the driver leaning against the bonnet with his cap pulled low. "Miss Weatherby?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply, and he opened the door for her. As the car pulled away, Helen allowed herself one long breath. Inside the envelope was a letter, 2 pages, written in her careful script. It told a story. Not one of blame, nor bitterness, but of memory. Of sleepless nights. Of sacrifices no one had ever asked about. It was not a plea. It was not a warning. It was a reminder. Of where Marcus had come from. Of who had taught him to tie his shoes. Of who had stayed up all night during his first fever. Of the woman who had stood in the shadows of his life, watching, always watching, even when no one else saw her. Helen looked out the window at the fading light as the city fell behind her. The letter would find him. Eventually. Days passed. The rhythm of Helen's life returned to its quiet order, tea at 8, walks in the garden, letters unanswered on the hallway table. She didn't wait by the phone, nor did she stare out of the window like characters in old films. She simply carried on. In the village, the grocer and the postman still greeted her as always, unaware that she had walked into a wedding uninvited and left behind a letter that could split a soul in two. Her world remained small, but steady. And for now, that was enough. On the fourth morning, a white envelope arrived. It bore no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, stiff, deliberate. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a note. Dear Miss Weatherby. Thank you for your attendance at our wedding. Marcus has asked for space at this time. We wish you well. Eliza. No signature beyond that. No warmth. No trace of the child she had once held in her arms. Just a cool dismissal typed on fine paper. Helen folded the note once, then again, and placed it gently into the drawer of her writing desk. She did not cry. Instead, she returned to her garden. The lavender was blooming, bold and fragrant. She snipped a few stems and carried them back inside. The silence in the house didn't feel heavy today. It felt chosen. But that afternoon, something changed. As the sun slipped behind the hills and cast long shadows across the walls, Helen passed by the mirror in the hallway and stopped. There, pinned to the corner of the frame, was a photograph. It hadn't been there before. She reached for it slowly. It was a picture of Marcus, no older than 6, standing in their old garden in Bath, grinning with 2 missing front teeth and holding a wooden sword she had carved for him. On the back, written in a young child's hand, were the words, "To Mummy. My best night." Helen stared at it for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the sad smile of someone who had lost, but the quiet, tired smile of someone who finally remembered something good. She returned the photo to its place on the mirror and walked away. She didn't know who had left it there. But she had a feeling. A week passed, then another. The village remained quiet, the days filled with birdsong and the slow shuffle of time. Helen moved through them with grace. Her steps were slow but steady, her thoughts calm but watchful. Then, late one Thursday evening, as the sky darkened to deep plum and the first stars blinked awake, Helen heard it. A knock. Not the hollow rattle of the postman, nor the friendly rhythm of her neighbor Nora. It was different. Measured. Hesitant. She opened the door slowly. There stood Marcus. He looked older than she remembered. Not in the way of wrinkles or grey hairs, but in the way a man carries the weight of words unspoken. His shoulders hunched slightly, his eyes unsure. He held nothing in his hands, no flowers, no apology. Just himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant rustle of wind through lavender stems. Then, without a word, Helen stepped aside. Marcus entered the house he had not seen in nearly 3 years. He didn't walk far. He paused in the hallway, staring at the mirror. The photo was still there, its edges curled slightly now. His hand reached out, but he didn't touch it. "I didn't know you kept that," he said softly. Helen said nothing. She walked past him into the kitchen. The kettle was already filled from earlier that day. She lit the stove with practiced ease, pulled 2 cups from the cupboard, and placed them on the counter. Marcus followed. He sat down at the small kitchen table, the same one where he had once spilled juice as a child and been scolded with nothing but a raised eyebrow. He looked around slowly, at the faded wallpaper, the worn cushions, the scent of time and dust. "Your letter," he began, then stopped. Helen poured the tea. He tried again. "I read it. All of it." She nodded, stirring her cup gently. "I know." His voice faltered. "I don't know what I expected to feel." Helen looked at him then. Her eyes were not angry, nor were they soft. They were steady. "I didn't write it to make you feel," she said. "I wrote it so you wouldn't forget." The silence between them was thick, but not sharp. It settled over the room like a shawl. Marcus drank his tea without sugar. Helen noticed and smiled faintly. They didn't speak of the wedding. They didn't speak of Eliza. They spoke of the garden, the weather, a book Helen had read twice and still didn't like. The conversation was small, but it moved, like a stream finding its way through stones. When he rose to leave, Helen didn't follow him to the door. He paused in the hallway again, looking at his own childhood face smiling back at him. "Can I come again?" he asked, not turning around. "You know the way," Helen said simply. And then he was gone. The season had begun to turn. Leaves along the hedgerows browned and curled, the roses faded, and a sharpness crept into the early morning air. Helen's garden, once bursting with summer color, now settled into a quieter beauty, deep purples, rust reds, and the gold of marigolds still holding on. She tended to it each day, her knees tucked beneath her as she trimmed and gathered, never rushing, never stopping long enough to let loneliness slip in. She had known the rhythm of solitude for years. But now, it felt different. Now, it was interrupted. On Wednesdays, the knock came. Always soft. Always the same. Marcus would appear just after midday, carrying nothing but the scent of the outside and the faint nervousness of someone still unsure of his place. Helen never asked where Eliza was, or what had been said between them since. He never offered it. Instead, they spoke of simple things, his work, the neighbor's new dog, a film he thought she might like. Sometimes he brought lemons. Sometimes a newspaper folded beneath his arm. Once, without explanation, he arrived with a small tin of her favorite biscuits. She said nothing, just placed them on the shelf where they had always belonged. They never mentioned the letter again. But something had changed. One day, after pruning the lavender, Helen looked up and found Marcus standing by the garden gate. He hadn't come in yet. He was watching her. "You kept everything the same," he said. Helen didn't rise. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced around. "Things grow where you give them room," she replied. Marcus stepped inside and closed the gate behind him. He knelt beside her, helping her gather cuttings into the basket. His hands were clumsy, unsure, but she said nothing. After a while, they sat on the bench beneath the fig tree. The same tree that Peter had planted the year Marcus was born. Its branches were heavy now, bowed with fruit, the leaves already beginning to fall. Marcus leaned back, eyes closed, his face turned toward the low sun. "I'm sorry," he said. Helen didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted over the garden, where bees hummed lazily and wind stirred the tall stems. "I know," she said softly. They sat in silence for a long time. No more words were needed. When he left that afternoon, Marcus paused at the gate again. "I'll come next week," he said. Helen nodded once, without looking up from her watering can. And so, the weeks continued. The letter faded into a drawer. The photograph remained by the mirror. And in the stillness of an English garden, among lavender and memory, something broken slowly found its shape again, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, as all the best things do.